Today we're going to be setting up Wazir and Caldera so that we can learn to detect and actively respond to attacks. We'll run through the setup of both tools, explore Wazir's monitoring capability, and then use the active response module to trigger automatic responses. When an attack is happening, being able to respond quickly makes a huge difference to the impact. We can also use this same methodology to verify our defenses and, if needed, bolster them against specific TTPs and threat actors. Before we dive in, I just want to say thanks to Wazir for sponsoring this video, and if you're interested in finding out more about the tool, there are links in the description below. Getting started is completely free as the platform is open source, so it's definitely worth checking out. As always, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and let's dive in. So let's briefly talk about the setup, and what we're going to do for both Wazir and Caldera is deploy them to my Kali machine. And ideally what we want to do is deploy Wazir to a different machine like Ubuntu or CentOS, but in this case I just wanted to keep things simple, so we have our attacking and monitoring machine, which is going to be Kali, and then we're going to have an Ubuntu server which is going to kind of mimic our web server or target. And to get started, all we need to do is come over to the documentation, and you can see that we have some great getting started information. So if you need to understand the different components and the architecture and the use cases, or if you just want to jump in and get everything installed and ready to go, then you can do that. And the really nice thing about the documentation is that it's not super long. It's to the point and detailed enough to work with. If we scroll down here, we can see that there are some requirements. So we are going against this slightly, and we'll have to do a tiny bit of troubleshooting just to make sure we have the right packages, but then we should be good to go. So to install Wazir, all we need to do is download and run the installation assistance, and then it will give us the admin password so we can log into the dashboard, and then we're good to go. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm just going to copy this and then pull up my terminal, and then I'm going to make a tools directory. So here I'm just going to keep everything nice and tidy, and so when we're downloading files for Wazir or Caldera, we can just keep them in here, and we're going to paste this. Now you see here that we do get an error, but it's quite verbose, which is nice, and also gives us a solution to the problem. And the error is, like I said before, the recommended operating systems are Red Hat, CentOS, Amazon Linux 2, and Ubuntu. So obviously my Kali machine, which is running Debian, doesn't match those, but we can use the -i ignore check to skip this. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so let's run this again with the ignore check flag, and we'll give it a minute to install. All right, so now that's finished, obviously it's installed everything and started all of the services for us and given us some credentials to log in. And also, if we take a quick look at the documentation, so here you can see that we go to HTTPS, so 443 to access the dashboard by default. And if we lose this password, here it tells us where we can find the password.txt file, which is inside of the Wazir install files.tar, and it gives us a command to print them out as well. So if you do lose this or close your terminal, something, not all is not lost. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull up Chrome, and let's copy this password, and let's go to https://localhost. And of course I don't have the certificate set up, but we can just proceed to this anyway, and then admin, and paste in the password. It'll do some checks, and looks like everything is running correctly. And of course, once we've got Caldera set up, we'll look at adding an agent as well. So let's take a look at Caldera now. So I'm going to come over to Google and Caldera GitHub, and you can see that I've already been to this link before, and here we are. So what I'm going to do is, if we scroll down, we can see the installation instructions are here, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the Docker deployment. So this is just going to make it a little bit faster and easier to set up. So let's come back to my terminal. I'm just going to pop open a new tab, come into the tools directory and paste. So git clone caldera.git recursive, and then from the looks of it, all we need to do is go into the folder that we've just pulled down, and then build the container and then run it. So pretty straightforward. I'm just going to copy this, give it a second to finish pulling everything down. So cd into Caldera, And I'm not in the Docker group, so I'm going to have to sudo. And if you're running Kali and you haven't installed Docker yet, so you'll get an error, you can just sudo apt install docker.io like this. And if you need it, you can also install, whoops, if I can spell, Docker Compose as well. So you might need those to get this working as I'm doing here now. All right, so the container's now finished building, and all we need to do is come back over to here, grab this and sudo docker run, and this is going to run on 8888. So let's spin this up, and it looks like we're all good. Now we could have run this with the detach flag so it runs in the background, but let's just sudo docker ps-a, and we can see Caldera running here. So this is all good. Now to access Caldera, we do need to do one thing. So if we come to localhost 8888, we're going to have to go into the container and grab the password. So let's do that quickly. So sudo docker exec -it and the container ID, which is here, and let's drop into a bash shell. And if I recall, if we go into conf, and it should be in local.yaml. So I'm just going to cat local.yaml and grep for pass. And that wasn't exactly what I wanted, so let's grep for red. This is what I wanted. So it creates two users, one red, one blue, and we're going to be using the red user. So I can just grab this. And of course, if we need the API key, it's here as well. And let's come over to here and paste this in, and looks like Caldera is up and running, which is good. So very quickly, Caldera has agents. So again, we're going to have to enroll our Ubuntu target into Caldera as well as Wazir. And then we have abilities, which are essentially attacks or techniques that we can utilize. And then we have adversaries. So an adversary might have multiple techniques. So first they might run some scanning, and then they might add a user, and then they might try something else. And then the operations is where we actually pull that all together. So we run an operation, and we'll take a little bit of a closer look at this after we get the agents deployed. So let's go ahead and do that now. So first I want to deploy the Wazir agent. So all we need to do is come into add agents, and we can just select the information that we need. So for our target Ubuntu machine, we can just do deb AMD64, and we need our server address. So let's just come to here and IPA, and here we're just going to use the ETH0 address, paste this in, and then we have some optional settings, so we can give it an agent name. So let's go with agent 47 just for fun. We don't have any groups yet, so we can just have the default group, and then here it gives us a command that we can copy to the clipboard, and all we need to do is go over to our server and run this. So here we have our Ubuntu machine, which I'm just going to log into, and let's install the updates later, and we'll just pull up the terminal, and I'll make this a little bit bigger for you, full screen, paste, and I think we can just hit enter. And to install the agent, all we need to do is come to our Ubuntu machine, open up a terminal, and paste this command. Now, something to note here is that when we run the agent, you can see that we're using sudo here. So this is going to give us an elevated agent, which is exactly what we need for monitoring. So let's just hit enter, and we'll put in our password. So make sure you run this as a sudo user. And if you need extra help for installing the agents, you can find more detailed information in the documentation. So obviously I just followed the dashboard because most of the time getting an agent up and running is fairly straightforward, but you can obviously go through the more detailed agent deployment information, and you can get information for specific systems as well. So this is going to help you if you're deploying to an enterprise environment or lots of systems, etc., etc. All right, so if we come back to our machine, looks like everything worked correctly. And if we come back to our Wazir dashboard and come back to home, all right, so it looks like even though we've run the agent installer, our agent hasn't checked in yet. So this is a good time to quickly take a look at the documentation. And I was just scrolling down, and it looks like we might have to enable and start the Wazir agent service. So let's just copy this and come to Ubuntu, and we probably need sudo, although we're all good here. Just pop in my password. and we'll give it a second to run. So let's come back to Wazzer, and we have one agent checked in, which is perfect. This is exactly what we wanted to see. So it's going to take a second to grab the information and update the logs, but I suspect in about 2 minutes, we'll have everything that we want. And during that time, we can come over to Caldera and we can set up an agent here as well. So I'm going to deploy an agent, and I like the Sandcat one for no other reason than I've used it before and I know it works. So we're going to go with that. And we need our IP address again. So let's come back over to here and copy this. Paste this in, and we need an implant name. And let's go with something like TCM sec, and then we can easily identify it on our host. And all we're going to do is copy this, come over to Ubuntu, and once again paste this in here. So what we also need to think about is that we're going to run this as a normal user, but I think for our example we actually want to run as an elevated user. So because we're going to add some persistence, we're going to create a new user on the target, and then we're going to respond to that with Wazzer. I'm just going to throw in sudo here. So let's just hit enter. If we just ran this without sudo, then we would get an agent running as Alex rather than as the root user. And looks like we're all good. So come back to Kali and come to agents, and we can see we have this agent here. It's elevated and it's alive and it's trusted. So perfect. And I think that is everything that we need. So if I just give this a quick refresh, we can see that we have all of the information from agent 47. So 192.168.79.148, the operating system. And if we come in here, we can see some compliance information. And what we're most interested in today is the security events, as we're going to be monitoring and also responding to an attack from Caldera. So here we can see all of the events and the rule levels and the rule IDs, and we're going to be using this to craft our active response. So let's go ahead and set up our attack and then look at how we can detect it, and then how we can respond to it. So first up, what we want to do is create an ability in Caldera, and this is basically just the attack that we want to use on our Ubuntu target. And of course there are lots of built-in ones that are ready to go, but I want to add a new user. So let's go ahead and create an ability, and just so it's at the top of the list, I'm just going to prefix it with AA, and then we're just going to call this add user, and we'll say adds a new user to the target system like this. And then the tactic I think we can go for is persistence, and then the technique ID, I'm just going to call this A001, and then the technique name, let's do add user once again, and it's going to be a single attack. So we'll select singleton, and then we can add an executor, and we'll just scroll down. We don't need to drop in any payloads, but we do want to change the platform to Linux as we're attacking a Linux target. SH is totally fine. So, and then we need our command. So all we want to do is sudo user add -m, and let's call the user persist. And then after that, on a successful command, we want to echo persist, and let's give it a password like this to sudo ch passwd. So we're going to add the user here, and then we're going to update the user password so that we can actually access that user and prove that our attack worked. And this is good because we're doing a few different things. First, we're running commands as sudo, which Wazzer will pick up on, and then we're using things like user add, which once again will add to the logs, and then also the change password as well. So there's quite a lot to detect and play with. So I think this is a good example of an attack that we can easily detect and respond to. So let's just create this, and then let's create an adversary, and we'll create a new profile, and let's once again just do AA add user adversary, and then add an ability, and here we are, AA add user. So let's hit save. And if we come to operations, we can new operation, and let's just do add user, and I'm just going to do 1. And then here we want to add the add user adversary. And once we're ready, we can click start. So what I'm going to do is run this straight off the bat, and then we're going to take a look at the Wazzer logs. And a lot of the rules and detection comes in ready to go out out of the box. So we're just going to run this and see what we see in Wazir. So here you can see the status is collecting, and we'll give this a minute to run, and then we'll confirm it on the host, and then we'll confirm it in Wazir as well. So let's come to Ubuntu and Kali, create a new tab, etc passwd, and we can see here, if I make this a little bit bigger, that we do indeed have the persist user, and if we su persist, we can become that user. So we've confirmed that the attack works. So let's come back to Wazir, and we can just refresh the events. And you can see here that actually pretty much everything we've done is already being logged. So you can see that we have the login time, the login session opened, and we can see some sudo execution, successful sudo to root executed. And then we have this new user added to the system, new group added to the system, the user changed the password. And so everything that we've just done in Caldera has been picked up and logged in Wazir. So we can use this and we can respond to this using the active response module. And what I want to do is, because our scenario is that we're attacking a web server, an Ubuntu web server, when a new user gets added, I just want to disable that user, because there's no real reason why new users should be added to a server that's sitting on the DMZ. That's probably weird activity that's outside the normal realms of system administration. So let's go ahead and set up an active response that automatically disables users added to our Ubuntu system. All right, so we've successfully set up Wazir and Caldera, and we can launch an attack from Caldera and we can detect it with Wazir. So let's go ahead and put in some active response. And this is great because usually when something happens, it takes a little bit of time for security teams to review what's happened and then manually respond to it. So being able to respond really quickly is going to be beneficial. So first up, what we're going to do is quickly check in to the documentation. And I had a look through this earlier. So we want to be in user manual, and then capabilities, and then we can come down to active response. And basically everything that we're going to go through, I've pulled out from this documentation. And really, there's a couple of things that I want to highlight before we get started. And if we come down to how to configure active response, it takes us through the whole setup, but there are two main things. So first, we need to configure the Wazir server, and that means editing the ossec.conf configuration file. So we need to add a command block to it, and there's an example here. And we also need to add an active response block to it. And again, there is another example here. Once we've done that, we just restart the Wazir manager. So using the sudo systemctl restart Wazir manager. And then we also need to configure the monitored endpoint, so our Ubuntu system. So we need to put our script on there in this directory. So var ossec active response /bin /myscript.sh or whatever we're going to call it. And then we also just need to make sure that we have the permissions set up so that can go ahead and run. And there are a couple of little tricks that I'm going to show you as well. So things that I did that helped me troubleshoot and get everything up and running. But first up, let's get our scripts deployed to the server. So I'm going to kind of do this backwards. I'm going to do the second bit first, get the script up and running, and then we'll configure the server afterwards. All right, so let's go ahead and configure the agents. And what I want to do is actually, if we come back to the documentation quickly, we can find the right folder. And let's just verify that the default scripts are in here, and we can use that to make sure we're on the right lines. So I'm just going to ls lah var ossec, and we need sudo like this. And you can see these are the out-of-the-box active response scripts. So let's create our own one in here. So I think nano comes by default with Ubuntu, so sudo nano, and then let's just call this disable new user.sh like this. And what I'm going to do to begin with is I'm just going to quickly output to a text file or a log file to make sure that the script is running. And then we're going to come in and update the script to actually disable a user account as it's being created. So we just want bin bash and let's just echo run to temp log like this. All right. Now, if we check back in, we can see that we need to set the permissions on here. And of course, in the documentation, it tells us exactly how to do this. So we need chmod 750 and chown root as the owner and wazir as the group. So let's do this and sudo chmod 750 and then sudo chown root wazir like this. And then we can check and see whether we're all good. And we have disable new user.sh. And of course, you can see the permissions are the same as the other ones, which is a good sign. Now let's go to the wazir manager and set up the command and the active response in here. And first, what we want to do is open up the var ossec etc ossec.conf. So I'm just going to copy this and then we'll come to our terminal and I'll open up a new tab and sudo, let's use mousepad to make life a little bit easier like this. And here we are. So we can zoom in a little bit on here. And I want to scroll down to where the current commands are. And you can see all of these ones that are the default out of the box. So disable account, reset, restart wazir, firewall drop, etc., etc. So I'm going to put mine at the bottom here. Now I'm going to quickly put in my script and then we'll talk through it line by line rather than me talking and typing at the same time. All right, so this is my command here. So I have the name disable new user and the executable. I think I need to actually change these to dashes. Let's just verify this. Disable new user.sh. In fact, the easiest way to do this is just to copy and then paste, make sure that we don't have any typos, and then timeout allowed no. And then of course we want in the active response section, we have disable new user, location any, and the rule ID. And this is really important. So this is going to trigger the script when this rule ID occurs. And we can see this once again if we come back into wazir and if we find the new user, which is here. So we have new user added to the system. And if I scroll down a little bit, you can see the rule ID over here is 5902. And we can click on this to inspect it a little bit more closely if we want to. So here's the further information on that. New user added to system, the ID level, etc., etc. So let's just save this and close it. And then we can come back to here and once again, we can refer back to the documentation and here we need to restart the wazir manager. So let's copy that, paste that in here, give it a second to restart. And now that we've got the terminal back, we can just come back to wazir, make sure everything is all good, come back to our agent's still alive, security events, and this is where we want to be. So let's run the Caldera attack and see whether we get the text file outputs. And then after that, we'll run it again with our updated script to make sure the user account gets disabled. So I'm going to come over to Caldera and let's check what user accounts. We already have the account persist. We could remove this, but I think it's going to be a little bit easier if we're going to run it multiple times to just update the username. And then we can see the difference between the accounts as well. So this is going to be quite useful. Now, just before we run this, there are a couple of things that I want to show you. And first up, if we want to see the logs from wazir, so if there's an error with our script or if something goes wrong, we can see the details. And I like to tail tacf and var ossec logs, ossec.log. And so if anything goes wrong, we should see an error in here. Another optional one is using PSPY. So for example, if I just come to Firefox and I search for PSPY64 GitHub, and a lot of you who do things like privilege escalation may know this script quite well. And all I'm going to do is just grab this link, wget to download it, chmod +x pspy, and then sudo./pspy64. And now when we run commands on the system, so for example, if we run ls or if something else runs a command, we can monitor it in here. And if we scroll up a little bit, you can see, for example, this is when we executed the shell for Caldera. Here you can see we're tailing the ossec.log file, etc., etc. So everything is being monitored in here, which is nice. All right, let's come back to Caldera, stop the previous attack. We've already updated the username, so let's rerun this and see what happens. All right, looks like status success. So let's come in here and cat etc passwd. We can see that there is a new user, so persist1 is here. And if we ls/temp, we can see that it did indeed create this log file. So temp/log, and it just has run. Awesome. So that's our first step out of the way. And in here, we can see that we have no errors. So there is some information in here, but we're all good. And in here, we can actually see the attacks. So for example, the commands that came in and then everything that's happening. And we can also see Wazzer responding to this as well. So /var ossec bin Wazzer execd. Nice. So let's update this script. So sudo nano, in fact, let's just hit up until we find the previous command so that we know we're finding the right thing. And then once again, I'm just going to paste the script in that I wrote, and then I'm just going to walk you through it line by line. And of course, by all means, use this as a starting point. And there are example scripts also in the documentation. So if you want to write something in Python, for example, there's a good Python script there to get started with, etc., etc. All right, so here we have bin bash, of course. And what we're going to do is we're going to extract the last user added from var/var/log/auth, and we're just going to use grep and cut to do that. And then I also added a little bit of a safeguard as well, because I don't think this is the most efficient way to run the script. What the best thing to do would be have Wazzer pass in the username as a parameter and then do it. But in this case, I'm just grabbing it from the auth.log. But to basically protect against accidentally disabling the Wazzer account, for example, I've added a little safeguard here. And then what we want to do is disable the user account. So usermod-l and disable the last user, and then usermod-s, and then set sbin/no login for that user as well. And then we can log the action to varlog as well. So let's save this, and we don't need to make any further updates. I think we can just come back to Caldera, come to abilities, modify this to persist2, and fingers crossed, we should be all good. Let's stop this, rerun the operation, and we might later on, for example, add some kind of cleanup script or something else to this, but just for today, I think this is good enough, and we'll wait for the status to hit success. All right, let's come over to Ubuntu and cats etc passwd, and here you can see that before, when we added the user persist1, obviously we just outputted to /temp/log and this user still exists, but persist2 here you can see has been disabled, and this is exactly what we want. So on our web server, we can't create new users anymore, and if we do, then they will just become disabled, which is a great way of preventing common things like people trying to create users for persistent. Now we can also come into here, and if we make this a little bit bigger, you can see that the active response was triggered, and you can also see some of the content. So when we're cutting and the user mod and things like this. So if you really want to go deeper into what's going on under the hood, then this is a nice option. It's not necessarily required, but for me, I like to see this kind of thing so that I get a better understanding of what's actually happening in the background. And of course, there is a lot more that we can do. We're just starting to scratch the surface for active response. So feel free to take this as a starting point and then create something that is way more sophisticated, more stable, and more interesting. So that's it for this video, and I hope it gives you a starting point that lets you explore different attacks against your system, as well as ways to detect and defend against them. I recommend that you focus on things that are important to you. There's no way that you can test every single attack, but try to narrow it down to threat actors and TTPs that you care about. And of course, Wazir can help you with this and does a lot of the heavy lifting for you. Catch you next time.